process. We've got the speakerphone, and I've tested it earlier, so hopefully everyone can hear. Brian, do you want to say a few words, and we can just make sure they hear us in the back? Brian? Hey, Brian, you want to start the meeting?
He went for a cup of coffee.
I wonder if I have to call in again.
But you're breaking up.
Come again?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
How's it in the back?
Yeah, you're breaking up, so I'm moving
Oh.
to the server, to the Wi-Fi.
So, yeah, this is a process.
All right.
All right. So I'm just rolling you in now. So we started this process last Thursday. Some of you were here for the opening presentation. So we've been going since last Thursday. We had an open studio. I see a lot of faces that stopped in the open studio. Thank you for everyone who's participated all through this process. And tonight is our closing presentation. Brian has some great things to show you that he and his team put together. You're going to hear both things that they heard. We had 8 economic development focus groups and I think 3 public focus groups. Just hundreds and hundreds of conversations over that time, and it's been a really good way for them to get to know the community and for me to get to know the community better as well. I learned a lot over the last week, so it's been great. And I'm anxious to share all those things with you. I will tell you that we have our on-the-table tool in the back. Brian will go over the schedule later, but basically you have through the end of the year to continue to give some input to the plan. You're going to see some images tonight. There's a whole written plan that goes with this. I think Brian's going to give us a draft early next year sometime, so there's plenty of time for them to incorporate anything new that they haven't heard into their input, although I can't imagine we haven't heard most of it by now, but please, by all means, if you have some friends that want to cover an interesting topic related to downtown, grab one of these on the table packets. It'll walk you through how to self-facilitate a meeting, and you can email the results to me and I'll pass them on to the consultants, so that's now through the end of the year. And then, of course, stay posted. We've got a Facebook page. The town webpage will be updated with new things as they come along, so plenty of ways to stay informed. Or you always know where to find me up on the second floor. Stop in and we can talk it through. So, Brian, are you about ready to get started?
Yeah, I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
If you want to take it from here, it's all you.
Oh, yes, thank you. So it's good to, I was going to say be back, but be with you again. How many new people do we have in the room? Show of hands.
Only 4 or 5.
Before I guess.
Okay, great. Well, that's good. I'm glad to know that there are new people. So because we've spent so much time together with the community going through things, and we had the opening presentation and the midpoint pinup, and we did a little bit of recap in each of those. Because we have a lot of stuff to cover tonight, I haven't done too much catch up on this. So I apologize for the new people in the room. I hope you don't feel lost, but you will have an opportunity to catch up, because as Jen said, even though we called this the closing presentation, it's really just the end of the beginning. And so that being the Planapalooza process. So there's a few things I'll tell you tonight. I'm showing things for the first time that are our interpretation of what we've heard from the community. And you'll actually see some drawings, some plans, some renderings, artist renderings of things. You'll see some, we'll talk about some big ideas that aren't graphical but are still important. Now, here's the thing to note. If you have been participating throughout the Planapalooza process, or if you're new and you don't see, the new people will definitely not see their ideas up, but anybody who's been there, if you don't see your idea, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be included. It's just that there's so much information that we've, not put everything on the slides. Otherwise, I wouldn't get you out of here until, 10 or 11 tonight, and you'd be really mad at me, because I know you probably have something else on Friday night that you wish you were doing. So I'm going to also say that the plans and renderings, and I'll reiterate this again in the that portion of the presentation, because somebody always forgets that I said it earlier, are not intended to be proposals. So the things that you see in here that are drawn are supposed to be graphical representations or manifestations of the ideas. And so what it does is it allows you to see the things that we're talking about instead of just having a bunch of words that I'm saying to represent an idea. and then you have one idea in your head and the person next to you has a different idea in their head. This way you all see the same things and can have something to respond to. So remember that as we go through this presentation. Don't get nervous if something unexpected to you. Now that I've said that and gotten you all worried, I'll start the presentation. All right, here we go. Yay. That was scary. So, as Jen said, we had many different opportunities thus far, and we'll continue to have more opportunities for people to give input. We had the public kickoff in September with workshop activities that were part of that as well. We started getting ideas at that time from the community, and then we also did meetings with the policymakers, the elected and appointed officials, to really start to get a sense of some of the things that they hear on a regular basis from the community and things that were important to them and their constituents. And then we furthermore had a kickoff with all the department heads because, as we always say, these plans take more than just the planning department to make them happen. The planning department is a crucial part of it, and from our perspective, usually in our work around the country, they are the keepers of the vision and really sort of, I call them the quarterback of the vision, and really help everybody stay on track. So that was an important meeting as well to get everybody on the same page. So the Planapalooza went for several days, starting on the 7th and technically ending on the 11th, but we've extended this one to the 15th because it's tonight we're still Planapaloozing. We had an opening presentation where I went over some ideas. We had focus meetings with particular topics, and I think I'll have to have words with whomever on my team put this slide in. I love the look on my face there. That's hilarious. So there are various topics. This was a sustainable stormwater meeting. They were well attended, especially for a small town. And it was really, really helpful for us because we're able to really focus on one topic and get down in the weeds. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm going to do that from time to time so I don't do a whole presentation without anybody listening. We had our open studio set up in the same location at 51 Main. And it was wonderful. You see our team, if you didn't get to stop in, that was us working. We set up this temporary office. But then we also had the workshop exercises available for people who missed out on that opening or the visioning night in September. And so we got some additional feedback and input from people who weren't able to attend in, which is why it's so nice to kind of do this process the way that we do it. There's so many different touch points and opportunities for people to give that feedback. We had a midpoint pinup halfway through, and it was really cool because it started off with a storytelling session with different storytellers from around the town, and then we did a visual preference survey, so we started to get an idea from the community about the types of development they were looking for. We've been doing some analysis, some sort of visual analysis and looking around. We had sort of our study boundary, and then obviously important things like the creek/river. We've been looking at the roads and the road network and where you have roads that are connected and where you have gaps in the connectivity. We've been, obviously the train right-of-way is an important part of all of that and all the things that you all are so familiar with that are happening there right now. Then we start looking at the buildings, and you start to see how the built fabric of the community lays out. And some areas you have larger buildings and some smaller, and it's just really kind of, as a citizen, this may not be helpful for you, but as planners, it's very helpful for us to look at these things. And then look at your parks, your distribution of parks and open spaces. And, oh, by the way, I'll say this as well. While we've spent a lot of time working on all of this and gotten a lot of input from all of you, and you've helped vet several things that we have talked about and looked at, inevitably there will be some things in this presentation that will need refinement moving forward. So as I'm pulling up this parks image here, I'm going, okay, somebody's thinking, oh wait, you forgot to put that park over there, and I know the one right there in front of the college, for instance. So don't get too uptight about that either. We'll be refining all of this. None of this is final product except for some of the renderings. So we were looking at some different study areas around the downtown, and some of these you may be asking yourself, if you can orient yourself enough, why in the world we were looking at some of these areas that we have no control over. They're private property. The town doesn't have any say-so on what happens. And it goes back to that thing that we talk about in each presentation about looking holistically at the community, looking for those connections, finding some opportunities to do some things that are innovative or unexpected. And so here we've shown a few. I think we've got some other areas we've been looking at in more detail from a transportation perspective for sure. But we'll get to some of this in a bit. We've been looking at some opportunities that I'll explain more in detail from the river perspective for restoration opportunities and bioretention opportunities, and getting into very detailed things like sand filter techniques and bump outs, and we've been building this diagram layer by layer. So this is kind of fun for us to see this take shape.
Hey, Brian, not to interrupt your flow, but can I just quickly point out some of the areas on this map? Because, I realize people don't look at the map every day like I do. They might just want to know what these different things are real quick.
Yes, please. Thank you.
So the yellow line is the rail bed, of course. And then this is...
It's pivoted in a way, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard for me to see.
Yeah, let's do this while we're paused.
Well, yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is it easier when my body's not in front of it? And then over here is Washington Street going out, out Washington Street. So that brown area is kind of in front of the Shaw's Plaza. And so this is Main Street coming up through. There's the Congregational Church on the corner. This is your town green where the pointer is. Marble Works over here. This is the St. Mary's School area down in the lower left-hand corner. And then this would be sort of the municipal office / library area here. Thanks, Brian. I'm looking at you.
That's not the St. Mary's
That's
School.
not the
Can
St.
you
Mary's
see
School
the
area.
pointer
That's
now?
the parking lot
Wait,
downtown. St. Mary's School is past that.
Oh, you're right. I see what you're saying. Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Natalie. So this is Mill Street, isn't it, Brian?
Yes.
This
Yes.
lower
Yeah.
left-hand brown corner.
Yeah.
Yep, Mill Street coming down, and then St. Mary's is down here, and we'll see some action there later.
Can you see that red pointer?
yes.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. I've not used this before. So yeah, it just occurred to me that you guys, I'm usually pointing and waving my arms around, and you guys are having none of the benefit of that. I was being very descriptive here in my office. All right. So we've been looking at circulation routes as well, major and minor, and that's all been, very instructive for us. But I just wanted to share that with you because it's kind of neat to start to see your town be broken down and analyzed like that, from at least most people think it is. So here's some things we want to try on for size with you. You don't have to dive into it, and because of the limits of technology, we'll try to hopefully have all the questions at the end. You guys have been generally conversational during presentations, which I actually like, but the technology makes it a challenge. So we've created a few guiding principles because we talked about that throughout this process. It's and the plan. It's important that you evaluate ideas and proposals and all of that based on a certain set of fundamental guiding principles that you can measure and test things against. And so we took a first crack at trying to create some based on the things we've heard. Here's one of the guiding principles: mixed use, looking at providing housing, jobs, shopping, and gathering places in close proximity for a vibrant downtown. And don't worry, too, you don't have to write all these down. This will all be available at some point in the future, so don't fret. Housing choice. We heard a lot about this. So housing choice is a principle. Increase housing choices for residents of all ages, incomes, and abilities within walking distance of downtown. So the more people that are in the downtown, the healthier the downtown is. Vibrant economy. Encourage creative businesses and entrepreneurship with the bottom line of increasing prosperity and quality of life for everyone in Middlebury. Transportation choice. Prioritize safe, comfortable access and movement to and within downtown by means other than the automobile. cultural hub want to nurture Middlebury's community spirit and cultural life, encourage downtown amenities and services that make downtown a welcoming place for all ages, abilities, income levels, and cultural backgrounds. Sustainable and resilient. Steward downtown's natural and historic beauty in all decisions. Consider climate change, resiliency factors such as decreasing dependence on fossil fuels and increasing regional self-sufficiency. So we can come back to some of those at the end, but that's just our first pass at it. The guiding principles tend to get quite a bit of discussion and scrutiny, so we are happy to get input on those as we go through the process. And I don't even mean just tonight. Obviously, you guys can marinate on it and study them and submit ideas to Jen and for revisions and things. So we're going to jump into, move over into housing a little bit. We've tried to break the presentation down into certain topics. So what we learned from housing and the housing discussions and input we got from the community, there's a desire for residential density within walking distance of downtown. Middle income housing gap or lack of workforce housing was brought up many times. A lack of options for empty nesters who want to be walkable when they downsize to get to the things they like, such as schools and libraries and schools. There's a lack of affordable housing, including potential downtown employees, and we heard from the businesses that they have a hard time attracting employees because there's no housing around. And people investing in short-term vacation rentals or Airbnbs leads to restricted housing availability and increased prices. So some of the recommendations, and again, these are truncated lists, so there's lots and lots more of various things. But some recommendations were identify appropriate locations for increased housing density. And I've tested over and over and over with all of you to make sure you are really comfortable with it, because you all keep saying densify the downtown, and that's okay. I don't disagree. It's just a lot of communities are very scared of density or very scared or protective of their downtowns. And so I'm hoping that means you guys have a lot of trust in the process there, that, you know, any new development would be something that you're excited about. Another recommendation to allow interesting, flexible, or creative product types that the community supports, such as cottage courts, small accessory units, building expansions, things like shorter setbacks, etc., just to allow for some diversity in the layout of things, to be a little bit more organic, and also allow for some diversity and flexibility for development. Identifying tenants who can afford to pay above market rate and subsidies for low-income housing. And that one is a particularly detailed, has a robust set of details to go along with that from our economists. We can talk a little bit more about that later. So we did a visual preference survey related to housing, and we boiled it down. We went through, I don't know how many, probably more than 100 slides. Thanks for everyone's patience that night. I believe it was kind of fun. And we pulled out some that people said yes to most clearly. So I grouped them a little bit. People seem to not like these, particularly the solar blanket trailer down at the bottom. For some of the larger housing, multifamily or duplexes and large single family, these are popular. And multifamily large scale was not popular. So moving over into stormwater, we had a lot of great discussions about stormwater, and we had our amazing sustainable stormwater engineering landscape architecture team that was helping throughout the week, and came up with a lot of good recommendations and some good ideas I'll show you. We learned that there needs to be more trees and plantings in the downtown. Green infrastructure can also support economic development. Taking advantage of opportunities to connect to the creek. Current maintenance budgets are stretched thin, and so it's hard to do some of these enhanced features that focus on sustainability. There's difficult topography and soils. When we start talking about sustainable stormwater, one of the key ideas is letting water get back into the ground in sort of a natural process, rather than piping it out to the creek. And when you have soils that don't like to absorb water, it's a challenge. So we have to be careful about that and thoughtful. There need to be mechanisms for self-funding stormwater projects. Right now, stormwater projects are tied in with highway projects, I believe. And so finding ways to have them be able to have their own sort of thought process and budgets will be important to get some of these features. And then implementation is the key. Maintenance and implementation is something of real importance and concern for those who have to maintain it. Some of the goals are to create a green network plan to clarify a long-term vision, designing priority concepts in more detail for future funding, coordinating capital planning with planning department to integrate stormwater improvements with the placemaking vision. And that's a crucial one there. We see this in so many communities that, each department has its own priorities and own things that it's moving forward with, or even organizations that are outside of the municipality that are moving forward with different initiatives. They often are, very autonomous, and sort of back to what I was saying before about planning department being the keepers of the vision, kind of quarterback role. It is our strongest recommendation that we make in every city and town, and are doing so also in Middlebury, that you really do, sort of first stop planning department. You've got a project coming online, or you're trying to do something as a nonprofit or an organization. Go to the planning department. Say, hey, what's the downtown plan say about this? How can we incorporate these things? Because there's a lot of ways to save money, be efficient, and get sort of more quickly to the goals that you want to by working together and checking in with planning. Want to improve creek buffers and add public access and views. And then also coordinating capital planning with the planning department to wrap green infrastructure into transportation utility projects where possible. So I just sort of trumped myself there and jumped ahead, but that's what I was getting at. And then investigate the creation of a municipal stormwater utility. So our sustainable stormwater engineers were not just coming up with recommendations on policy and whatnot, they were also looking at physical features and left us with some great imagery to show how stormwater can become part of an amenity of a community, not just a functional element. So here they're looking at some examples from around the country and around the world probably of creek edges. People have dealt with creek edges in a number of ways, some more urban, some more rural. Looking at streets, excuse me, looking at how we can have sustainable stormwater features incorporated into streets where plantings are already going and start to minimize some of the need for conventional infrastructure. How we can incorporate it into parking as well. And then finding these special moments or with little lanes and alleys and pedestrian passageways that can have a real stormwater function and also become just a really unique place of character within the community. Looking at, because of your topography, we've got to get the water downhill in a lot of cases, and so finding some really cool ways to have the water cascade and step down and not become just a fast waterfall, but sort of go over one level, fill up, spill over to the next level, and add beauty and art to that process. Looking at how parks can have a stormwater function as well, and this is actually one of the projects they've been working on recently in the historic park, and they added a sand filter, which you can't tell, looks just kind of like the park with a bit of a slight depression. These are a little bit more obvious, but still beautiful nonetheless, and the parks can be, obviously they're large areas that can be good for stormwater. And so they started on the draft of the Green Network, and starting to tie in, looking for nodes of activity, how you would circulate between those nodes, looking at some of those river restoration opportunities that I pointed out earlier in our diagrams, sand filters, finding some of those opportunities in, this is your town green Triangle Park area. Looking at putting in some bump outs in the streets as a dual function of slowing traffic and also creating places for more stormwater. And then opportunities for green alleys and trying to find ways to enhance Bakery Lane and Mill Street, and Park Street also is going to become an important component in this regard as well. And then adding some kayak canoe launches as part of that while we're doing some of our restoration work. So this is starting to become a detail of the Mill Street and Bakery Lane connection. What you have here is Main Street coming through. Here is Bakery Lane coming around. Here's Mill Street going down. Here's the Stone Mill, and here's Park Street. And so all of these little areas of blue and green and all these little labels that you see are all part of a overall stormwater concept. So here I'll see, maybe the next slide has a little bit more yet. So here's a zoom in of the Stone Mill area. So one of the things that we were thinking of, and I'm not going to get into this level of detail on every one of them, so don't worry, I just wanted to share with you sort of so you can see our thought process and how careful we're being about all this. There's, right now you walk down Mill Street, there's currently parking all along here, and so when you're standing at the Stone Mill, you actually, besides a little bit between here and here, you don't have any view of Otter Creek. It's all you see are the back of cars. And so it occurred to us that if we actually simply just restripe and put the parking on the other side of the street, you're able to now, one, have a clear view of the river for a long way down Mill Street, and two, because it's kind of wider than it needs to be, there's some opportunities to narrow it up and reclaim some of the paving to create some wetland opportunities, some swales, bioswales. There's a canoe, a kayak launch here. There's an overflow. So all of this is sort of the culmination of a series of stormwater interventions up Mill Street. And this is sort of the last stop before the water gets into the creek. And there's a lot of really cool and special things that we can do. We're even trying to be so thoughtful as to recognizing if we move the parking across the street, at nighttime there would be headlights if somebody turned their lights on, and there's currently houses here, and so we're looking at putting a hedgerow to block the view of the headlights into the house. But it all has to work together, and there's a lot of opportunity in this area. It's one of the more special parts of the community, and we'll also be looking more at Frog Hollow as well, with some really cool things that can happen in that area. So here you start to see the landscape architects and engineers started creating some sections so we can start to understand how it works. So these will be refined and taken to the next level, and so they can actually become some implementable tools that the different departments can have to help move things forward. Here, this is a zoom in of Park Street and the end of Park Street, if you will. This is the bike shop here, and then the Stone Mill as well. What we're looking at is the water coming.
That's the gallery, Brian.
Sorry, thank you.
Yep.
You got it. So this is actually really exciting. I went up on the deck up here, and you have an amazing view up Park Street. And right now, besides the architecture, there's not too much to see along Park Street. And some of the interventions that we'll show you in a minute are going to be really, really cool and featured from up here. What we're looking at is having the water come down and it hits that retaining wall, actually breaking through, doing a bioswale, which is an opportunity for the water to start to collect some here, have a break in the wall. Once this fills up, it overflows through one of those cascades that I showed you in one of the images prior. The existing planter that's there would now turn into a stormwater feature and have some ability and capacity to capture water. And again, it would overflow into a system and then go under the street to a series of other stormwater, really beautiful treatments that lead up to the mill, which is actually over here, and start to become part of the experience of going onto the bridge. A lot to all this, but as you can start to see, it's there's a lot of moving parts and pieces, but the thing about it is that it's all trying to use nature and mimic nature rather than using expensive infrastructure, pipes, and things that are much less healthy for the environment. This is Main Street coming through. This is that intersection of Bakery Lane and Mill Street. So again, just showing different features, plugging in here, trying to make this a really cool experience, activating the side of the building here. Right now it's currently sort of under building storage and things, but it's pretty high. And so we think there are even some opportunities for some cool retail moments that happen there. And here they're putting a runnel or a swale that runs all the way down Bakery Lane and starts to tie into some of these other features. like. Zooming down the street a little bit, down Bakery Lane, more features, and then when we get to the river, to the creek, this is where it really starts to get interesting and picks up with the Riverwalk idea. And there's sort of two experiences or two conditions of Riverwalk. One is sort of where you're going along the shore, and then because some of the stormwater features and the site constraints that are needed for future development down here, we actually have the idea of, like they've done in Nashua and some other places, where in certain parts of the Riverwalk, it actually is outside and cantilevered over the water or over the bank. So you kind of come down, this is the bridge right now, so you come under the bridge, come around, go through the existing trees, and then you're literally leaning over the water, and you come back in and go back up. Now, the land that we're reclaiming by doing this is an opportunity, again, for more stormwater features, because all the drainage and runoff that will be coming from future development there, it's really going to be imperative in that location to capture it before it gets into the creek. And so we're going to have to be very thoughtful about this area, but it also can be one of the most special places to access the river. Here you can get a sense of what that looks like. Apparently there's lots of fish in the creek. But the idea is that, Baker Lane over here, we're capturing sediment and sort of pre-treatment. And then the wetland area here, then if it overflows the wetland, it can then furthermore go back in the creek once it gets cleaned up through there. So lots and lots of detail on that, some big ideas and some exciting stuff. It's really cool because at the end of the day, if you guys do these things that we're talking about here, you're going to be a national model. People will come and look to see how all these amazing, artful, beautiful, functional single stormwater techniques that you've implemented in a relatively small area. But you're lucky because some of your most critical areas are sort of packed together in these two Baker Lane and Mill Street moments.
Can I hop in for a sec?
Yeah, please.
Before you go on to transportation. So with the stormwater stuff, I guess I do want to, I don't think there's anyone here from Otter Creek Engineering, but I do want to thank them for coming out, pro bono for free a couple times this weekend and just helping Brian and the team, pop manhole covers and look and see what we have there to make sure it all works. And for donating, plans of the right of way so we can see where the existing utilities are so that we know these are realistic ideas. But as we're out there, and talking about, sort of infrastructure planning, there's some aging infrastructure on these two alleys. So the overall game plan is that we have these concepts, and that way when we need to replace a water line down the middle of one of these alleys or replace, this old manhole was made of brick. I've never seen such a thing. If we have to replace a brick manhole or something like that, the idea is maybe I can get out ahead of it with a grant or something to pay for the stormwater piece, and then we combine that with the capital infrastructure piece, that comes out of the infrastructure budget, and just start to pair our regular maintenance projects with things that can improve the appearance of the area. So don't feel afraid if you see all this and you're thinking, oh, that's going to cost so much money. It can be rolled out over time, especially if we're working to carefully partner and fold it in. All right, thanks, Brian.
Oh, yeah. Yes, no, that's all wonderful points, and thank you for filling in those gaps, because I do have to say, without Otter Creek Engineering, we would be we would not nearly be as far along as we are in this thinking. They provided crucial data and also just the local insight. It was unbelievable, so they are owed a debt of gratitude. And then, as Jen said, this and really everything in this plan are all intended to be incremental. We show these things and it's like the full build out, and I always joke around with communities, and in some ways I'm not joking, that when we draw plans for a community, these are like 100-year plans. Now, I'm hoping that you guys get the stormwater stuff done much sooner than that, but just the idea is that, it's a very iterative process that counts on the very thoughtful vision up front, so you never, ever, ever miss those opportunities. And that's why I was talking about each time some initiative is to move forward, sort of checking in with planning and the plan and see, how we can cross mingle funds and ideas and all of that. So getting into transportation, we had our transportation engineer working on this, and we had, we got a lot of great input from the community. Citizens came and marked up maps and, really started to help us identify where there were gaps in the multimodal transportation network. We're looking at things like crash data, where some safety issues are. And then we started to create a proposed mobility map, and this is something, sorry, that will require, much more thoughts to go into it and really make sure we haven't missed anything. But some of the big ideas are making sure that we close gaps where sidewalks are missing, that we really focus on making connections to the TAM, and consider innovative designs such as side paths and shared streets. And it's not all just sidewalks and bike lanes are the only solutions. So this one will be something that, especially if you're a walker or a biker, you'll want to spend some time looking at when this is all released, and give us some feedback to make sure that we've captured every opportunity on this map, so it can be part of future improvements as well. So this is a side path. So we're talking about sort of a multimodal opportunity, so that you can get bikes and cyclists there. Goes both ways in most cases, and there's a lot of different ways. Obviously, this can be done and designed, and but the idea is to really provide a robust facility for people. This idea of shared streets, they're originally were called Wunderhofs. This is sort of this word from Europe, and the idea is that pedestrians, in a lot of ways, have the priority on the streets. The streets are designed so that it's not necessarily obvious where there's no distinction necessarily between cars and where cars go and where people go, and which you may say, well, that sounds really dangerous. That sounds like a horrible idea. But because of the fact that cars know and it's signed appropriately to let people know that they've entered a shared space, that they know that they've got to be really careful. And so you imagine if you're driving a car through a parade and there's people walking around or a crowd in the street, how careful you are. It's the same kind of phenomenon that happens in these spaces as well. So we found a few spots where this could be really cool. We're also looking at some opportunities. This isn't Middlebury, by the way, if you couldn't tell, but looking for opportunities to do some road diets and slim up some streets that might be overly wide. Most communities we work in, they have standards, street standards before we get there, and the street standards aren't necessarily geared towards pedestrians and cyclists' comfort. They're geared towards moving cars and also emergency service vehicles, which obviously is important. But we like to have narrow driving lanes, so the cars don't feel so comfortable going so fast. If you set a car in a driving lane and they've got 2 feet on either side of them, you have really no reason to be careful or drive slowly. And so we're trying to find some ways without doing Band-Aids like speed bumps and other things to slow down some traffic a little bit to make it a more comfortable environment for people who aren't in cars. So here's what a road diet can look like. So they've narrowed up some of the lanes, they've added some bike facilities in this case, and so you have starts to become a bit more pedestrian friendly. Moving into overall sustainability. So what we learned is that you guys have been concerned about sustainability, and you have the opportunity to really become a model community for resiliency in the face of climate change and other global challenges. People talked about pursuing local clean energy generation and decreasing carbon footprint of the town and increasing efficiency and reducing pollution. And then the idea that sustainability should really inform nearly every other thing that is in the plan. There are a few things obviously that are sort of standalone, but it's one of those things, just to really think about each time you're making a decision. Does this meet our goals for being sustainable and resilient? So we heard some things, tapping the river again, and I understand people have been thinking about that and trying to do that. I was amazed when we got down and walked around at the river's edge behind the buildings to see where the waters are actually still diverted and rushing through where the turbines and things used to be. There's some opportunities to do some things that are a bit more small scale with some microgrids, micro hydro turbines, and even if it's merely a demonstration, some of the things you could do to capture energy from just to acknowledge that sort of a core value of the community. But it'd be ideal if it could be much more robust. We learned about some solar opportunities. It looks the college, some students mapped out suitable roofs around that were good locations for solar, which is an amazing thing that they did. So that's a great, useful project. And then exploring aesthetic design options to incentivize implementation of some of these things. So you see the guy here with this roof, you could tell from a distance there's sort of two-tone roof going on, but it's not, these sort of big solar panels that, as I was saying while I was there, were just designed by engineers without aesthetics as a key component of it. So there's much more to sustainability, by the way, that will be coming, but there is, a lot of the focus of it was dealt with related to stormwater thus far, but really looking at not just ways to use technology to be more green, but doing some of the things that people always used to do, like how you orient your buildings in the future to maximize solar gain and not need to rely on heating and cooling systems, and having trees around that can shade the buildings. And it's just things that we take for granted that actually are sustainable techniques as well. In the economy and culture, we had our amazing economist, John Sober, working with us, and he was all over the place with the community, talking to different people. And some of, I think at the beginning, you guys might not have known quite what to make of him and his assessments, but I think over time everybody really started to understand and appreciate how thoughtful he was and how deep he was digging to try to come up with some solutions. So these are some of his slides. I'm sure I won't do them justice, but we'll run through. Related to population and housing, there are some issues that he noted: limited population growth and aging population, of course, workforce shortages, limited retention of students, and limited student spending in the downtown. I'm not going to read all of them, but just kind of go quickly through some of these. So some opportunities. He really said, this is a place where people want to be, so that's huge. A lot of places have the issues, some of the issues you have, but nobody wants to be there, so fixing it's not easy. So there's an increasing number of telecommuters, and there's a well-educated workforce if we can keep them around and tap into it. And then there's definitely an active and involved community. Related to zoning and land use, the key thing for me on this one was that, as in most places in Vermont, Act 250 impedes development. However, you guys have some really cool opportunities in some of your industrial and area where you've already got some of your Act 250 out. So that's a huge plus for future development. And you can see that already manifesting itself in many built new projects there. My screen just flashed. Can you guys still see it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So rents and land values are really are too low for significant new development based on his analysis. Using the data that was available, I'll say that with all of his information that he's provided, the data that was available says these things. And so having to be clever and creative on how do you attract the new growth if that's the case. And then dense development and structured parking will have to require a subsidy in order to make it happen. So that's tricky. But you've got the ability to be flexible and accommodate new and creative land uses, and the knowledge and base that you have in the community is unbelievable, and the community cares so much. So there's real interest in doing some great things. So that's a huge plus. So some preliminary recommendations: strive to direct residential and commercial growth in the downtown, following what we heard. Having a real pro-density attitude for the downtown, which it seems like you already do. Being very receptive of the college, playing a more significant role in the downtown. I know in an ideal world, the town is completely autonomous, self-sufficient, and doesn't have any needs for any sort of institutional investors in downtown. But based on your remote geography and some of the data points that John found, really, really capitalizing on the university and hospital and others could really help in the downtown, help you all get what you want from your downtown, make it thrive more, and as long as they're willing to be partners and follow the fundamental guiding principles, that's key. So finding ways to address or mitigate Act 250 will be important. Easier said than done, though, as I'm sure you all know. Flexibility for creative uses, such as small accessory units. We heard a lot about that. And then allowing short-term vacation rentals, but considering how town fees are getting paid. And so there's an even playing field for the hotels as well. We hear that there are some state fees that are paid, so it's not as lopsided as we initially thought, but we need to look more into that. In retail, one of the biggest difficulties we hear is finding employees. So you've got businesses that have plenty of customers, but not people to serve them. That's a real problem. But it's better than not having customers and having plenty of employees. So construction obviously has had an impact on business. We've heard that there's limited parking that's easy to find, but I've heard both sides of the coin on that. Retail and restaurants are struggling to attract students, and we heard stories from people who went to the college 10, 20, 30 years ago, and it was, of course, she was downtown. That was the thing to do. And so how do we get people back downtown, even though the drinking age is higher than it was? And we heard retail and restaurants are struggling, as everybody around the country are, because of online shopping and things. So we have some really cool ideas about that. So the good news is sales are increasing for most businesses. A lot of local ownership and customer loyalty is a good mix of business types, and moderately healthy vacancy of 8%. So initial recommendations, again, just a few of them, designating language-only dinners at select restaurants on certain nights to tie into the college language program. And some of these things we proposed and we heard that people used to do. So hopefully, if we've come up with it on our own and recycled an idea, it must mean it was a great idea. So you need to put that at the top of the list. Partnering with restaurants to accept the meal plan from the college. That's huge. We've done that in other communities. Encouraging the farmers market to come back downtown. We heard story after story about how that was such a loss in the downtown, and actually a loss for the farmers market, because many people who used to go on a regular basis told me they just don't go anymore. Potential program for BMPs or County Economic Development Corporation. Some social media and marketing training to attract students and tourists. And then this was one of our fun sort of out of the box ideas to deal with the shipping and people competing with it. Trying to get students in downtown, they're going to order this stuff anyway, so they may as well come get it downtown in an Amazon locker station. And while they're downtown, then hopefully they'll buy some other things. So even considering opportunities like moving the college campus mail downtown as well. Hospitality, hotels are struggling a little bit with less than ideal average occupancy, cyclical nature of visitors, and then short-term vacation rentals need to be addressed. But the hotels are an iconic part of the town, which is huge. There are many short-term vacation rentals. It reflects the desirability of the community and the large level of visitors. So how do we tap into that and make sure that it's evenly distributed so that everybody's thriving equally? And then short-term vacation rentals provide investment opportunities for locals as well. For office and innovation and entrepreneurship, we heard that there are struggles finding adequate small office space to meet people's needs, and many people aren't aware of the significant growth in innovation and co-working in the area. So really getting the word out about some of the cool stuff that's happening naturally and organically, and building off of that will be crucial. There's significant investment and growth in production of co-working entrepreneurship in town, and the college has a successful entrepreneurship program, and it's increasing investment in these programs, and hopefully we can work together to tie all of it together so that it's actually working, so it's not being competitive with some of the other efforts that are happening. Some preliminary recommendations, looking at the co-working incubation partnership between college and town, marketing the exciting progress and local innovation. I mean, some of the stuff you guys are doing is of national note, and how do we get people so they know that they can come there and set up their business or move their business there and still work, even in such a charming small town remotely. And so things like partnering with college and towns for local innovation grants can be an important part of that. And then making sure you've got the top-notch, in some cases even beyond what you need, just so you can brag about it, infrastructure for things like broadband and others. Arts and culture was great. John, our economist, was really blown away with all the stuff that's going on there. But he did find that there's limited coordination between the different organizations and partnerships. There's a lack of regional awareness of Middlebury's cultural assets and entertainment options, and a lack of local awareness of events and programs and some of these resources as well. Some of you may be saying, what are you talking about? I go to everything. I know it's my favorite part of the town. And it follows that a lot of times people who participate in things like this are keyed in and know what's going on, but you'd be surprised how many of your neighbors don't. So there's an impressive art scene that can serve as an economic generator. It's already there. We don't have to just plant the seed and hope it grows. We can just build on it. You have great events and venues. Having proper venues is a real challenge for a lot of places. And the strong opportunity and will for more collaboration and economies of scale amongst those groups, and then opportunities to raise awareness and market shared events. Some of the recommendations that John came up with were to enhance the arts for the Middlebury and make that part of your event locally, regionally, and even nationally. And because when you're looking at something back to the business side of things and entrepreneurship and innovation, people want to, if they're going to move their business to a place, they want to know that there's still stuff to do even when they get there. So this becomes an important selling point of the community. Creating an arts entity to provide shared coordination, advocacy, and marketing, and have a board of reps from each of the different organizations. So kind of like the quarterback role of the planning department and some of the physical manifestations that the plan would yield, having something like that related to the arts would be helpful. Enhancing collaboration, for instance, an arts pass, so different groups can just have a pass to different things and move from space to space, enjoying all the wonderful things the town has. And if town funding exists, consider the library expansion and as a use on the EDI site for redevelopment.
What's EDI, Brian?
Oh, sorry, Bakery Lane parking lot area. So he also looked in detail, speaking of Bakery Lane, he looked in detail at the site and the economic.
Brian,
Yes?
I was just kind of like, I was just saying that I think that you're taking questions at the end. It'd be better to let you keep on with your flow for now.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, just make sure you don't forget what it was.
Start this slide
but we'll
over
come
again
back.
for us. Start this slide over again, would you? Just start from the top on this one.
Okay, great. So, so he did a lot of digging and looking into the Bakery Lane redevelopment opportunity here in the parking lot area. You may have seen some of the prior proposals. Excuse me. For that, the town has been very smart in trying to be proactive about this site instead of just leaving it up to chance. So when John dug into it, he started coming up with some a better understanding of what the issues are and where to move for moving forward. So it looks like that it's going to be important for there to be, acceptable and viable uses on site that the community is excited about, but also they need to be viable. The massing and design are important, and I think in some regards, some of the prior proposals didn't get favorable comments about them in every case because the massing and size of them. So creating a 3 or 4 site redevelopment scenarios based on the findings, and then recommending preliminary public-private partnership structure and having maybe a development advisor to help you guys shepherd you through this process. The findings will inform the future detailed site development strategy. And for each scenario, you got to look at the costs and revenues and financial feasibility and assess the community benefits and economic development impact, as well as assessing design constraints, massing, and the concept site plan, and then making a recommendation on the preferred scenario to create a development strategy from that. So there's some potential opportunities that he saw, ways to incorporate. Some of these we heard from the community, and some of these the team came up with that we thought would work, and were based on his analysis of the financial viability of the project. Potential public spaces would include Riverwalk, pocket parks, and gathering spaces, and public pedestrian access through the site to the river. Some potential anchor tenants, because it's going to be important to have the anchor tenants. The library expansion can be part of that, and that would be one where you sort of combine funding from things you already have from town with some of the development funding, and that would be collaboration. Looking at possibly a relocation of the museum from college. We heard about the idea of some college faculty housing, and also administrative offices or hospital administrative offices and CCV office space. Now, we did hear that there's some concern about it being so college focused, because the college has, already such a presence in town. And so I think, there's probably some good ways to make sure that you have housing that is not just for the college as well. There's some scenarios in which you would have, a developer would develop the site, and maybe the college guarantees a certain number of units in the development, and it's their responsibility to find tenants, but the developer knows that he has that guaranteed rent income to help make it a more financially viable deal. But it doesn't have to be exclusively college faculty housing, if there's housing as a part of it, because we've heard from the community that you guys want to have housing in the downtown. It's a good site. Some potential additions would be some pocket retails, not too much, because we want to keep the focus on retail where it is. Market rate housing, condos and apartments, other office uses or community uses as well. And then some design considerations to think about. Accessing the site from the bridge, I think can be a really cool feature and can be well done. Really having it step down and be tiered rather than sort of all one big massing, so that it looks like maybe even multiple buildings. Having Riverwalk connection to South Street, Riverwalk connection to south of Cross Street, and so you're able to go under the bridge, and then really focusing on the density as okay, but not too massive, so that it's starting to detract from the charm and character and the scale of the town. You have the topography working in your benefit there, because it slopes down, and so they're only from the river would you see sort of the maximum extent of a building or the middle of the site. And then we heard from the community that they're okay with some contemporary architecture based on our visual preference surveys, as long as it's not too blocky and starts to respond to, in some ways, the local vernacular architecture. So we heard from the community some preferred uses, library expansion, childcare, parking, and some of these anchor gathering places where everybody feels welcome. That was a key component. So back to some of our visual preference surveys, since we're talking about character and charm. New England small town charm. These were some of our strong yeses. People really got into and excited about these. These are some strong no's. People said this one in particular looked too much like a mall. This one was a little bit too massive and too modern, I think. This one was too castle-y, prison-y. And this one was California. Some other no's. This one is very interesting. If you've seen the prior proposal, you can imagine here's your bridge, here's the staircase coming down, here's your river, creek, riverfront walk. I think that there's a lot of similar ideas in this. This is just really big and really monolithic. It's not a bad looking building, but context, is everything. And I think that they had the right idea, and one thing that was different about this proposal than the old proposals was, instead of just having a parking garage exposed on the ground floor, here they have a little parking garage there. You can see it tucked in. But here they actually have, access to the building, storefronts, whatnot. That's sort of nice. These are some more yeses for mixed use commercial. And then waterfront development ideas here. Oh, here's the original proposal. Actually included that. So you, sort of one of the ideas that they had, sort of from the back. These all got good feedback. This one's really interesting, and I want you to think about this. We found this image. This is actually in England, but you could imagine that sort of tucked away down in your Bakery Lane area. It might have been at one time sort of thought of as back of house when the town was originally getting built, and you see it in the old bird's eye views. You see mill buildings and industrial sorts of uses. And with some of these things that are larger footprint proposals, we heard some people say, what about a conference center as part of development down there, some hotel use, some residential, some mixed use. You can imagine that this could be a conference center today, and it's all connected and all that, but originally it was, you know, had the waterfront industrial function and all the pulleys and gears, and so this, a building like this, if your bridge were sort of running along the side of it here and it's stepped down, and there's some, you know, parking was tucked away in the back, and but you can see this is the same development, how vital and active it is along the waterfront. So just keep that in mind when you're evaluating future proposals for larger scale buildings. So we'll get into some ideas now, some ideas that are more sort of planning specific rather than policy ideas. So we're looking for ways to activate the river, but also having, you know, this idea of your arts and culture being combined. So one of the fun ideas, if you missed it, was this is in Providence. This is their river fire or water fire. I can't remember the name of it, but all these cauldrons are put out there, and they have, it's like a big festival, a big event, and just tons and tons of people come. So we had an idea, what's sort of the Middlebury version of this, and you'd use your infinite supply of logs to create your little fires with. It'd be really cool event. The idea of community agriculture, having some community gardens, and I'm even looking at an idea for what I'm calling the town farm. I'm surprised that there's been not very much discussion about this in Middlebury, so this is an idea that may end up on the cutting room floor, but being in Vermont and all, it tends to be something that we find as an important component in the community. But you guys have such a great network of farmers and farmers markets and the co-op and all, you just may have all your needs met. So anyway, looking at some ideas for how it would be functional as well as beautiful. Also looking at some dark sky lighting solutions, and you know, make sure you don't have all the light pollution, and so you guys can be known for that as well. And then, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, this is a big deal. This is, but it's a big deal all over New England, so you guys aren't alone in this. But we found the most unflattering picture we possibly could of the busiest pole in all of the town, certainly, and maybe in all of New England. This pole is doing a lot. And in fact, our engineers commented on that they didn't know they'd ever seen quite so much going on. So anyway, burying utilities obviously is expensive and all of that. But again, when you have that as something that's on your to-do list and you're coordinating with projects that are moving forward, and there's one vision, one voice, and one set of marching orders, you can start to incorporate some of these things into future projects. But now for the big ideas. This is the time when I remind you of what I said at the beginning of the presentation. Please do not be alarmed at things that you see that show development, planning, drawings, artist renderings, or anything else on property that the town does not own. If you are the owner of said property, please be excited that there's somebody who's doing free planning on your property, and it is not required that you do so, do any of the things that we've drawn in here, but it is hopefully to be inspirational in the way that, as I always tell, the story of the Burlington Mall. We drew on the property of the mall. We said do some things, put the streets through, make it mixed use, turn the stores inside out, et cetera, et cetera. The owner of the mall thought that was a great idea and set forth to do so. we could have shied away from the property and said, well, we don't control that. The city doesn't control that. Let's not draw on that property, and it wouldn't have happened. And so we do this as an illustration to hopefully be inspirational, but also so that people can see, you all can see the ideas of, if we're talking about mixed use and walkable and creating civic spaces and stormwater, art and all of these things, these are the places where we show that. And so in the plan, these ideas, these drawings will hopefully show up, unless you guys just totally lose your mind over it and we have to leave it all out. But hopefully it'll all be in there with lots of caveats saying all the things that I just said. But also we'll have lots of bullet points and lines and pointing to all the components that embody all these policies and principles that we've all talked about and you'll all vet in the future, so you can see in the plan how you might manifest some of these things. With that said, I will proceed. So, excuse me. So St. Mary's School came up a lot, and people were asking about what to do about that. We heard stories about people who went to school there and watching the nuns ice skate silently in the dark in their habits, and then there's people that live around here that have college stuff nearby. The building's vacant. There's lots of land around it. So what can we do? We also heard from people there's interest in pocket neighborhoods and the idea of having some different housing types and sizes, and then we also furthermore heard from the church that they were interested in development that really started to support their mission and were helpful to people in some way. And so we have taken liberties and drawn on property that we do not control, we don't own it, and we are just being bold. So here is a plan for a pocket neighborhood. This is one of 1,000 plans that we could have drawn, but we came up with this idea. And dark building here is the school, as you see, maintaining the school, renovating it, fixing it up, and preserving some of the area next to it for a park. We heard that there is interest in some consolidation of some of the daycares. So here we show a child care component. Obviously that could go in the school as well, but we showed a separate building here. What you'll notice too is there are different colors of buildings here. What we're showing in the darker color are row houses or townhouses, village-esque, not very urban-looking ones. They start to define the civic space. So we have a park and a plaza, and these all face onto it. There are these smaller houses, sort of medium-sized houses, if you will. There's a street that comes through here now, and a new street through here that ties into Mill Street. All comes up together. Here's some more row houses. There's a piece of property right here. We showed them on that. This is an alley or rear lane coming through behind, so all the parking goes in the back. And then this is a new neighborhood on the corner. So if you live right here, yes, you get a small-scale street, but you also get a park right there across from you. Looking at things like street trees and sidewalks throughout, and working with the existing lot lines. And we may have encroached a little bit. There's some ways to fix that. And then here, these orange ones that you see, these are actually tiny houses. So we have a little group of tiny houses in another small civic space. And so within this small development, you have everything from large houses to row houses, medium houses, to tiny houses, and then some mixed use or some commercial, neighborhood scale commercial or childcare, and then resurrecting the school. And so the idea is really just to see how, even in a small area like that, you can get a lot of interest and value added to the community to meet a lot of your goals. Here at Bakery Lane, we decided to take a different approach. So here's Bakery Lane, just for orientation. Here's your creek, the bridge, and because you've already seen the other proposal with a more large-scale, massive building that was sort of one big block, we wanted to show you something different than that. Now, here's the trick about this, though. There are times when community desires and economic reality don't sync up necessarily. And so I've shown something, well, you'll see in just a second, something that's much less intense than the prior proposal, but likely doesn't tick all the boxes for the sort of economic reality check that John has put forward. We tried to create it in a way that it is adaptable and adjustable over time, so you could go up higher if you want, and so this really could be just sort of phase one of development. But anyway, here is an alternate solution to, instead of just one big building. So here, Bakery Lane comes down. The white buildings are existing buildings, but you see here is a library expansion at the back. We thought it was important to keep the circulation that happens right now up the hill. It is tricky though, because you're confined by the bridge, and to get a parking structure in place that is sufficiently sized to be, cost effective and efficient, is tricky. But what we've done is, right now, this is actually a deck. There's only 2 levels. So we've shown access to the upper portion of the deck from here, and then access to the lower portion from here. And then along the river, we wanted to make sure that this felt very intimate and very much in keeping with the types of things that you currently see, and it tied into the river walk, the sustainable stormwater concepts, and then really featuring and accessing the river here, and then using the bridge, as our economist mentioned as well, to have some access and have the buildings address the bridge. So these would be taller buildings. The idea would be these are very thin, very narrow buildings that hide the garage, and then you have some bigger buildings down here. This can be a number of things. There's not necessarily an intended purpose. If you remember, our economist said you would have limited retail probably in these locations, but obviously if there's a market for it, the more interesting, the better. And then here we'll show a view. It's not an exact before and after, but the view is not exactly the same, but here's a view off your bridge right now, your river peeking around the corner. Here's the big parking lot, the town Winnebago, and the library is up there. And you see here the slope that we've been using as our ally in helping figure this out. And then here is one possible low-scale opportunity after. So if you recall, let me go back to the plan view. So this is essentially the view looking right about here, right? So, so here's that park area. Here's the building right up against the bridge. We actually hung a bike lane off the side of the bridge because we've heard it's tricky for people to come across. The idea is that your parking is still back there. It's tucked away, like you saw in that one big building that I showed you all. You still have access to it. Here's where you come in off the roundabout. You come into the parking through there for the upper level, and then you come down Bakery Lane and come up and access the lower level right here. Our sustainable stormwater features are all throughout, so all the treatment things that they showed up in these areas. You see we even got rain barrels and things on the buildings. We should have put solar panels, but we missed that, so we'll be adding solar. Of course, places for picnicking as well as walking. And here you see this idea of the cantilevered river walk that hangs out over and then comes back in. These are new buildings, all new buildings here. But you see that these are very small scale. These are very low scale, very intimate, and feels very like it would have been a natural organic growth of Middlebury. I just don't know how realistic it is for us to do this, but the idea of keeping what happens along the river being more intimate and more small scale is an idea that can be maintained no matter what happens on the rest of the site. I started looking at an option too, where I took that the boathouse that I showed you from England, and actually was putting it here as kind of the waterfront face of a new larger scale development. And it was really cool too. So we're still exploring this, but this is just to show you a more fine-grained, less economically viable version of what the river could look like. What did you say?
She said it sounds like us.
So here's another opportunity for us to draw on property we don't control. We saw that you have this great riverfront park and you have this really cool marble works facility. When we were up there, we saw people there, but at the top, at the river park, a lot of my experience was kind of parking lot. And the marble works buildings that are facing the river are pretty, they're very low, 1 story, and not some of the most, don't get me wrong, they're good looking buildings, but of all the buildings that were built over the years as part of different, industrial kind of ventures, they're some of the most simple. And so we were looking for an opportunity to feature the river more and to River Park, and we know that parks like your great town park here are sort of best featured when they're framed by buildings, and so otherwise it just becomes sort of wilderness. And so we were looking at some of the old aerial photographs, but the old bird's eye view drawings, and there were all kinds of other buildings that used to be in these areas, and it inspired us to do the following. Here, we showed some thin buildings, again, sort of lining. What we did was actually push out the park, so it's a little bit wider, and have a retaining wall and an observation point, kind of an outlook, staircase coming down the slope, and then the trails coming through. We've incorporated some of our sustainable stormwater techniques. As part of that, you already have a rain garden over here that we could incorporate as well. And what we've done is add some buildings in some of these areas that can start to define this space. And then also when you come in Marble Works, until you get to sort of this area here, it's really the experience of sort of driving through parking lots. And so we were showing some little infill tiny buildings here that could be serve the purpose of starting to hide some of that parking, create more of a streetscape to get you down to the river. And then you get to this moment where this sort of culminates. There's a nice little turbine here, and you can park, and this sort of becomes back of house, and you park in all these areas. We were trying to hide some of the electrical infrastructure back here, and then have this, as it does currently connect into the bridge. But now you have opportunities for some mixed use along facing out onto the park, some river-facing residential as well. But really making sure that this feels very public, not private, not like you're intruding into space, and it's just an expansion of the park, and it feels public like these feel public. So here is a sort of before, it's a zoom capture from a video I found. So again, the view is a bit different, but here is an after. So here's that parking lot that you see. Here are those liner buildings. Here's the expanded park, and we thought it would be kind of cool, since we're obsessed with the logs, that our retaining wall could be made of these logs. And then when you need to replace them, you go pick up some more. You guys are going to be like, enough with the logs already. We have a space over here for log art, a space down here for log rolling. And what you can see is, here's our stone mill. That's such a cool feature now. And then we've incorporated some of our micro turbines in those locations. And really, you can imagine being out here with your sustainable stormwater features, the water being captured as it runs off from all these parking lots. There's a runnel here, one of these cascades that actually pours over the edge and down into a wetland area here and treats it before it gets into the river. So as usual, on and on, it's really starting to feature these cool things and making stormwater art and making your core principles visible to all. So obviously a different take on it, but just a little bit of development can really transform this. Now, the crucial thing here is that the park should not feel like you've lost park. The park should feel enhanced. It should feel expanded. It should feel more programmed and even more usable and wonderful than it already is. So if you were to undertake an endeavor like this, making sure that this is all very public feeling, public facing, storefronts or restaurant fronts or whatever it may be, plaza out here, this isn't a road, this is actually a pedestrian area. And it all ties in, gets you back into the downtown, over across the river, and it could be really special. This was one of my favorite moments. One of the favorite things that we did This is our utility alley here. This is where we got all of our famous poles. And this is Park Street. And this is that view I was talking about from being up on the deck. If you've not gone up there and taken a look at Park Street, you haven't missed much. But in the future, you will. It's going to be amazing. So here's that retaining wall. Currently, right now, the water all just comes down and gathers here. There's an ancient storm sewer that Jen was talking about. It's all made of brick. That's right in this area. And so that's sort of at end of life. Before too long, I haven't done a technical analysis on it, but, it's really old. One of the things we want to do is, even when we're fixing old things and incorporating new things, we want to harvest the resources as part of being sustainable. So one thing I'd like to do is, when that gets replaced, and this really cool thing I'll have to show you actually gets executed, I like to use the bricks from the old storm sewer as part of our paving material. So here's our stormwater engineer and Jen taking a look out at the glory of all of this. And it is a beautiful stone wall, but that's kind of the extent of it. So here's the before, and here's the after. It just rained, by the way, so this is a rain event. The sun's just come out. We probably need a rainbow. Here you see the stormwater has come down the hill. As it's going down the hill, we've actually incorporated some of these bump outs and these bioswale features. We've put impervious paving here for some of the parking areas. We have some of those cascades. You can see it peeking up over the wall. There's another bioretention area that captures the bulk of the water and holds it. Once it fills up, it overflows into what has been now gone from planting retaining wall into stormwater feature. It fills up and spills out. And then there's features that go all the way down the street that take you down to those cool things that I was showing you at the bottom of Mill Street, where we've moved the parking to the other side and created the canoe, kayak launch, and all that. We're showing things just to always be featuring it, like rain barrels. We need to put some solar in here. And now you can start to see we've enhanced the staircase as well. They're very steep, so we pulled it out a little bit and made it not so steep. And here you can see the bike shop is got the door open. There's people testing bikes and rolling around, and it's just really transformed. You've got a pedestrian walking down the street because this now has become one of these shared streets. So the car could drive down, pedestrian would take a half a step over, and the car would come down and go through. And it's all quite a different before and after.
It hasn't been for a long time.
So here we've taken more liberties. One of your more suburban interventions that's sort of closest to the downtown is your beloved grocery store. And we understand that it is well loved and people use it quite a bit. We also understand that it is a sister project or cousin to your other grocery opportunities, and that people actually go back and forth between the two in one shopping trip. We see that this is probably one of the largest parking lots in town, and it's right here next to some of the finest components of your village. And so we've been looking for opportunities to use some of these techniques that we've talked about to start to hide some of the parking areas while still making it usable and functional, and then cleaning up some of the issues here so that these actually can work together better and be safer for people when they're going across. So we have shown what we call these liner buildings. They're very narrow buildings, and they start to infill along the streetscape here. Excuse me. Now, what we've done is there's a big one here already, and it actually took up a good bit of parking. So we tried to keep these much more modest, so you still have parking. The parking here turned to parallel parking. This is still ahead in, and we've started to reorganize some of the parking so it's actually a little bit more efficient and less organic. And then we've actually aligned these intersections now. So you can go straight across here, safe pedestrian crossings here. And then because even though they don't really count on it because everybody knows where it is, and if you don't know where it is, you've got a phone that knows where it is. But just in sort of honor of the fact that more suburban, large-scale auto-dependent uses like grocery stores like that visibility, We've shown actually them adding a really cool architectural feature here that gives them a little bit of height, so you can see it, so people won't forget that Shaw's is back there. But somehow, even with all of this going on, you've never forgotten the co-op, and we actually are just sort of following the steps of what the co-op's already done, has its liner building. So here's what it looks like now. If you didn't know better, and I didn't tell you this was in Middlebury, you wouldn't know. This could be, any of the towns around. And there aren't many moments in Middlebury where you can say that, certainly not in the downtown. And so we felt like it was a good opportunity to do something different. So here's your Shaw's. Now you see it. Now you don't. So here's the intersection. It comes through. Here's some of these small scale liner buildings. They're actually pretty narrow, but very intimate, very charming. You could imagine that some of these could even be some more reasonably priced housing, or it could be businesses. Here's a little shop here, some coffee, or even Shaw's. If sometimes we see, if they've got some of their endeavors they want to put in some of these liner buildings to fit in more in keeping with town, you could do that. Excuse me. You also see, as always, our sustainable stormwater features. So we have the stormwater bump out with the curb cut so the water flows in there. We've got our solar charger here charging your car. We've got solar panels on the roof. We've got dark sky compliant lighting, all the bells and whistles, and we've actually narrowed this up a little bit so it's not, it had a little bit of a road diet, so it's not so speedy out there. So before and after. All right, so let's wrap it up here. At the end of the day, as I keep telling you, you must not put this plan on the shelf. You have to love it and keep it on your tabletop, on your desk, on your bedside table, on your store counter, everything. And it has to be on a podium when you walk into the library with the light shining down. Plans that aren't red implemented. So, but at the end of the day, as always, your most important role in all of this is making sure
It's when it was Charlotte's Testament, some people bought it. Completely redid it. That sounds good. We were at 8 South Street. It's 10
I
South
think
Street.
that's one of the,
And they painted it blue, and
concept
put a lot of money into it.
houses.
It needed some
Oh,
work.
is it a real house?
Used to be Neil was Neil was before you.
Yeah, but that was Charlotte Stetson's,
Yeah.
our next door neighbor.
It's right next door.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Before
It does
that,
look
it
very
was-
different.
before
Yeah.
that, it was Neil McGraw.
Oh, it was? Oh, I thought you were talking about our house, which had been, the,
Right.
Neefs. Right. Eight South.
What happens when you put around?
This was the Lyle Riley's, the Riley house. That's much remember that house.
hello.
Okay, we hear you again.
Okay, where did you lose me?
Middlebury.
Right on that last slide that you were on, right at the beginning of that last slide.
Uniquely Middlebury. I think you've lost us now.
Yeah, what did you say? Uniquely?
Uniquely Middlebury.
Joe remembers things. He said uniquely Middlebury.
He doesn't have aphasia setting in
He
here.
has really good retention.
The wrap up.
But we've lost your screen too, Brian.
What's next?
Meltdown.
He's there.
He was getting pretty tired. His cough was getting worse and worse.
Yeah,
He needs to take it.
Yeah,
Put it
his
better.
voice is wearing out.
He's fighting
Like
something.
he's What's gonna go gonna home hap- and what's gargle. happening Well, next? no, he was a week ago too. What's next?
What's next?
Yeah.
Go to bed. Don't go to bed.
Are we supposed to respond, or are we supposed to go home? Gargle and
Oh,
go to
what would be
bed.
next in the
Stop talking.
presentation?
Yeah.
He is through his renderings, and I think he's about to open it up for Q&A. So if we can get him back,
That's why he's gone.
Oh.
I'm
you
gonna
ready
give him
for
a
it?
chance.
never watch
Yeah, I'm gonna give him a
Q&A.
chance to, like, he has my number.
He's gotta
so
reboot.
Nothing else.
Himself or his.
Yeah, I think he's probably.
As always, turn it off and turn it on.
If anybody wants a refreshment, like a little break, and you wanna
Yeah, that's a
walk
good
over,
idea.
we still got coffee and water. We'll be back online in a second.
There were a few acronyms that he did not, just, it was EDI,
Yeah,
Well, that's,
It's funny that's throwing people off. So yeah, this is the Economic Development Initiative. Were you in town when they were doing this big project down here?
all the stuff behind the library.
That's called,
Neither was I. It was like 2015, and I guess there were some developers that proposed a big building down in that
We
lower
asked,
lot.
we did a request for proposals.
Yeah. So we're sorry the internet went out in his office, so you can blame Tennessee for that.
he's back.
Yeah, that's in there. Okay, so the room is once again yours, Brian.
Okay, great. So, really what I'd like to do is to stop talking now and just listen and hear, if anybody, if anything got anybody really excited, things that they love, things that were, concerning, or, what are your fears, aspirations, your dreams now that you've seen this stuff? Are we on the right track? There was anything that we need to rethink? And we're going to be, taking notes and listening, and so feel free to ask away.
Okay.
Do you think we could interest Bloomberg?
So I think we may have a ground rule that I wasn't aware of. Do you need people to come speak into this mic to hear it?
Oh, yeah, for the TV.
Okay, so this is being recorded, which is going to be great. You can watch it again on MCTV. The one downside is we'll need people to approach the podium and speak into the mic. You won't hear your voice projected probably, but they'll hear it at home.
Okay.
So if anybody has a question, anybody want to hop up here? Yeah, Joe.
Hi, Brian. I might be getting a little bit ahead of the game here, but I wonder if you and perhaps Jen could give us a little sense of the process from this point on. What are you going to do? What is this plan going to look like? And maybe Jen could talk about how, when we take it from there, what are we looking at here? Could you maybe, Brian,
Sure.
address, your end, and maybe Jen could talk from the town's end?
Yes, yeah, I'll tell you from our end, and then she can fill in anything that I missed or is different on her end. So from our perspective, what we do next is we take all of the input, all of the feedback that we've received throughout this process, and hopefully we'll get some more input tonight. And then we'll start working on the first draft. And so, like a lot of the things that I said, that just didn't make it in this. I mean, it's already a long presentation. Sorry, by the way. But a lot of things that just didn't make it on a slide will be resurrected and incorporated, and then there'll be further description and narrative and all that would go into the document. And so, at a certain point, we will complete that first draft. I'm sure that there will be just because people love to give feedback. Hopefully, you guys will continue to do some on the table sessions and things. So it'll take us a while to write the first draft. And so as comments come in, Jen, excuse me, will can collect those and if anything new or revelatory comes up that warrants inclusion, then that will hopefully show up in that first draft, and then we'll deliver that draft to Jen, and she'll do with it what she wishes.
So I have your milestones slide up that you sent me earlier today.
Good, yeah.
You're scheduled, Brian.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. That's helpful.
So it's showing your draft plan delivery in spring. And, yeah. So the planning commission, still has many more meetings to go on this. All of our meetings are public. We're first and third Fridays at noon. Feel free.
Thursdays.
Sorry. Thank you, Barbara. First and third Thursdays at noon, so feel free to stop in, watch our agendas.
Unless you're working and you can't really come at noon very easily, which has always been
And we're not gonna get out of this without at least one
Problem
more
with
public
mine.
meeting, so stay tuned.
yeah, good.
Does that help, Brian?
Yes, that's great. Thank
Anybody
you.
else have a
Yeah,
question?
and I think the key thing to remember is that all of this that we've been doing and have done thus far is all in addition to the official process. So once you move forward to go actually adopt it, there will be it has its own process then. And so a lot of times people are like, get concerned. You're like, oh, I missed the Planapalooza, and I missed the opening kickoff event, and I missed I missed everything for one reason or another. And now I'm not going to get to give input. And so, worst comes to worst, you still have the official process that you can come and weigh in. I assume you guys have public comment periods during planning commission hearings or whatnot. So.
And maybe that's a good segue into the on the table. I can show that slide real quick while you promote that product.
Yes. Yeah. So here's the thing, like setting up our office and all of that stuff in the downtown and really embedding ourselves in the community and, eating mad tacos and Mr. Ups and Two Brothers and, everything else in between, helps us really get a good sense of the community and hopefully provides just hours and hours and hours of opportunity for people to either come to events that we had or just drop in. And we really did have lots of people who took advantage of just being able to just drop by our studio anytime just because it was a real open door policy. And so I think, though, that's great. But the on the table stuff that we do is, it's been out there for a while now, and it really allows the process to get into the neighborhoods, and not just into the neighborhoods, but into the house and into the kitchen or into the cafe or whatever. And the idea is, if you haven't heard of it already, it's this really user-friendly packet that's created, and you sort of follow the steps. You invite friends over to hang out and have a good time and help give input on the planning process in the meantime. And then there's sort of a worksheet, if you will, that you fill out, and then you get that back into Jen, and she can get all that into the hopper of big ideas. So it's really, really useful. And if you haven't hosted an on the table session with your friends, all of you who are here tonight, that sign-in sheet was actually a sign-up sheet, so you're all doing on the tables now.
Tricky.
And then, the next slide, of course, shows that you can always visit us at our website. We've got a whole page devoted to this project where you can get the most recent updates.
Good.
So we have someone else with a question. Are you ready for that, Brian?
I was born ready.
All right.
Well, I was born ready to ask him. I have two questions. One, what did you think about the Ben Franklin building site? I didn't hear anything about that, and it's got a very large footprint.
Yes, that's a great point. We heard lots of people with lots of ideas about Ben Franklin, and we heard people lamenting the loss of it as well. I'm excited about it because, to your point exactly, it is a really large footprint. And somebody said, "Oh, what about a bowling alley and all of that?" And that inspired me. It reminded me here in Nashville we have this place called Pinewood Social, and it's really, really interesting. It's an old trolley barn, so it's sort of similar, like long and rectilinear space. And when you walk in the door, there is a little bakery on one side, and then there's a coffee shop on the other. And when I say shop, I mean more like a counter, but they feel very independent. They're like a food hall. And then there is an area of just sort of communal seating where people come in and study or hang out or work or whatever. And then behind that area, there is a bar in the middle, and then all around it seating for an amazing restaurant. And then in the very back, there is a 4-lane, I think, 3 or 4 lane, classic, really cool vintage bowling area.
Well,
it was really, just something like that, taking advantage of the fact that in these historic downtowns, it's very rare to have very large space like that available, and is a hindrance to a lot of downtowns. They can't get some tenants that need bigger space. So you could get some really interesting office users, but hopefully whatever you get will have an activated ground floor.
Well,
that,
can I just
sort of gathering place.
Can I just follow up on this a little bit? You talked about creating new places for people to live. new places for people to shop, the need perhaps for office spaces, and you somehow have not yet, and I hope you will, make a proposal as to what we could use with the most underutilized piece of land in downtown. The second thing I'd
The
like
Village Green?
No, what are you referring to?
I'm talking about the Ben Franklin's building. That is the
Yes.
biggest opportunity, and I would say one of the biggest threats to downtown. The other thing,
Oh, tell me about that.
Yeah,
Why? How's it a threat?
because it's vacant and deteriorating. It's ugly. It's not. It's an opportunity that's being missed, and it's deteriorating. That's why it's a threat. It's like rot starts someplace, and I don't think we want that to happen. And I think if that were if something wonderful happened on that space, and it's big space, it would excite people all through this town and beyond, much more than it would doing something on the periphery, and I like some of your ideas, whether it's at down Bakery Lane or behind Ilsley Library or on Mill Street. If you do it downtown on that site and turn it into something wonderful, I think it would be make a greater contribution to the vigor of town than anything else. The other thing I wanted to mention, though, we've got a tension. Maybe it's not really a tension. We've got evolution going on in Middlebury, and has been for a long time. The evolution is that the downtown is becoming a place for discretionary spending. It is all the necessary services and goods that used to be sold in downtown have moved out to little mini malls off of US 7 and maybe elsewhere. And I think we need a vision of, is that the way are we going to just let that happen, or do we want to encourage downtown Middlebury to become even better at appealing to visitors, and find a place that maybe businesses that serve the necessary needs of the local people could be encouraged to build together, or to be located closer to one another and closer to the concentrations of population. Thank you.
Great. All good points. Thank you.
Wouldn't want any silence. My name's John Barstow.
John, I could go first. Is that okay?
No, I got up first.
Okay, go ahead.
Jeez, whatever happened to fairness?
I just have a response to John. Where are you? Or John Frieden. I'm a retailer, as most of you know. And what I've been faced with in the last 5 years is this is the first year, this year, that we have not had hockey. We cannot have skates, sticks, equipment. Lacrosse companies want $1 million order for us to carry their product. Hockey companies, we dealt with 2 of them, want $100,000 orders. Shoes, we haven't had shoes for 5 years. $50,000 a quarter for each brand.
Oh my God.
The town of Middlebury,
Yeah.
we've had to develop around those perimeters. Today, as some of you may know, we're called the Middlebury Shop, 4th and Goal at the Middlebury Shop. We have a relationship with the college, a contract. We pay them money to carry that product, and we're doing very well. We have a higher profitability with the products that we're carrying now, so we continue to be successful. One other point. That was brought up in the presentation was the relationship with the college coming into town and all that type of thing. We're starting to see a little bit resurgence in that, quite a bit of resurgence. I think one of the ideas that's been floating around, and this was mentioned, was to put the mailboxes or the Amazon pickup here to bring the college students down. But we have a internet presence with our Middlebury College product only, and we have students on campus that pay $10 shipping charges for us to ship them their sweatshirt. Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. To get them from Main Street to the campus,
Yeah.
$10.
So, you know, I just wanted to respond to that a little bit. So we're not, the downtown is not becoming selective to be a little bit chic or anything like that. We're
Adapting to the
we're adapting to the reality of it.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah, and it's good to know that. Fascinating.
I've spoken with Angelo and said, you know, how can we make this known to the community? I mean, people come into our store and want ice skates. And every day I explain 5 or 10 times, we don't have ice skates. You can't get ice skates in town. You can't get shoes in town. You can't get Levi's in town. You can't get this in town. I mean, the town can't buy the amount of quantity that I would have to buy to just keep going.
Yeah, but, yeah, that's, thank you for that, I'm so glad. I don't have anything that insightful to add. My name is John Barstow, and this is just moving along, not addressing this current conversation exactly, but of the sort of crazy big ideas, the one that fascinated me the most was St. Mary's, that piece of property. I'd never noticed how open it is, how much opportunity there is, how close it is to everything else. And I just think that is something we really ought to try to pursue to create density there. The notion of trying to keep that, as far as I can tell, it's a solid, quite wonderful building that presents opportunities, whether it's incubator space or who knows what. But that intrigued me, and it's something I'd never thought of, and thank you for this whole process exposing that, to me, interesting opportunity. I think the whole trying to develop, it's something we've talked about for years, Mill Street and Bakery Lane, in the ways you discuss, and that moving I've always, people say all the time here, all the best views of our creek are had by vehicles. They all get to look at it, except they're not sentient. So, so I think that's a really interesting idea to shift that around, and it doesn't seem pie in the sky over time and done, you know, incrementally. And I'm not sure why there is so much emphasis on wastewater. I guess it's one of those things that's out of sight, out of mind, but some of the creative ways to deal with it, I mean stormwater, they had storm wastewater things, stormwater, gray water. It is a big problem because of all the pavement, and I found that a lot of that intriguing, and it sort of forces some more space and some more green and a more thoughtful way of developing and enhancing the town. I guess those are my only two things at the moment. I'm really interested to hear you say that, because not having goods people need in town is a function of a global economy that prohibits you doing so. What are you gonna do? Order from Amazon, oh gosh.
Thank you. Those are all good comments. One
Natalie
thing
Peters?
on the
One more,
On the
Natalie
bill-
Peters.
Respond to what I asked.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I want to respond to something. So
Go ahead.
one thing that I'd like to do related to the Mill Street is to challenge you all to do something that Burlington did when we did their downtown plan, and that is to implement something before the plan's even adopted. They got so excited about ideas there, they started implementing small things that were easy to do and didn't cost much money and didn't really need a big vote to do it or whatever. And that parking, shifting it from the river to the other side of the street, you literally could go out there tomorrow with some paint and stripe it. We talked to the owners of the mill, Stone Mill, and they thought it was a great idea. And so I just want to challenge you all to find the little things, the little ideas that we've talked about this week and move forward with them.
Thank you.
That's absolutely critical. That could happen tomorrow. I think you're right. I want to thank you for all the great ideas and listening to us, because there are lots of things that give us food for thought. But I also want to ask you, we're one little town that's not unlike hundreds of others that you've worked with. What are towns doing? The angle that we're getting today out of the people and the directions that people have taken so far is to try and make it a place that people want to come, hang out, eat, and socialize. That's what our downtown is angling toward, not a place where you do business, buy things, because as he pointed out, a lot of businesses want $100,000 orders. We've had other stores that went under for the same reason. They don't deal with little orders anymore because they can do so much better with the Walmarts and the whatnots of the world. And our little town is suffering from that and from the internet. What happened in the towns that you've worked with across the country? How do they deal with it? Is anybody coming up with a great idea about what to do besides turning our downtown into a social place where everybody gets together in big buildings and socializes and eats? What's going on?
Yeah.
You
That's a
have
great
more
question.
contact with it than we do. I'm waiting for the answer.
What we find that cities and towns all across the country are struggling with this, as you just pointed out. The good news is that in spite of for the past several years, sort of retail trends and whatnot, at least from a data perspective, you're starting to hear stories in the media, and the data supports it, that people are really sort of still seeking those experiences. So the idea of experiential retail is really a big buzzword these days, where people are going, and there's more to it than just going to get that thing. It's not just dealing with chores, as our economist said. You really want it to be something more of an experience. And I think that one thing to remember is, though, that downtowns were always a place to be seen and to see people, and to go. There was a social function. Now they've lost their utility function for the most part. I always joke around about you can tell the health of downtown by how far from the center of town you have to go to get a pair of underwear. And now we've been looking for ways to bring some of that functionality back, but while still enhancing the experience of being down there. So it's a win-win. One of the things we talked about was, right now you have the dollar store out there at sort of the edge that has some pretty utilitarian things, some functional things. We hear that people go out there, college students go get stuff when they, sort of back to school stuff and whatever. You can usually find some underwear or whatnot. But one of the things we kicked around was the idea of, would the dollar store be willing to do sort of the downtown five and dime, kind of the more downtown version that had different things necessarily than you'd have in the dollar store, but it has some more functionality to it. But then we're embracing the online stuff, and that's getting those retail Amazon lockers in the downtown. And it'd be great if we could get a lot of business going again in downtown. So not just retail, actually have businesses and things. And so it's all working towards that goal. It's just so you have to take a holistic approach, and there's no silver bullet for sure. The thing that you guys have going in your favor, though, is the charm and the character that most of the places around the country wish they had, and you guys already have that. So that's huge.
Brian, this is Barbara Saunders. I am chair of the Planning Commission, and I just want to really thank you for the amazing experience this last week has been with the Planapalooza. You have made me think and see the town through new eyes. There are so many components that I had never thought of before, and I think you've moved us as a community to seeing our town with possibilities we hadn't really thought about before. And so I really thank you for that. And I particularly want to point out, thanks to your economist. I can't remember his name, but John, he was so good at listening and pulling the facts, and I learned so much about the economy of Middlebury and what was happening in Middlebury through his lens and information he presented, and I am hopeful that that will be in the final report and that people will be able to see that, because it was really informative about possibilities and what's really happening in terms of people coming into Middlebury. But bottom line, I just really wanted to thank you. I think you guys were incredible listeners, and seeing so much of what people said reflected in this presentation tonight was really very affirming, and thank you.
Well, it's very nice of you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, you're all released.
So, hold on. One more thing. Don't go anywhere. So, the last thing that we have to do too is, I just have to share with you guys something. You may not realize this, and some of you may, but it can't go without being said that your town planner, Jen, has been running around like a mad woman trying to pull all this together, to support the team, to get all the right people to the table for our discussion, for us to be able to listen to. And if it weren't for her and all of the things that she did, this wouldn't have been possible. So thank you to Jen as well.
Thanks, everybody, for turning out. Okay, thanks, Brian.
All right. See you guys.
Good
Have a
night.
good one.